Right, there we are. We are officially live on LinkedIn. I'm not going to do what everybody does and say, let's wait for people to get on, because in my experience, they're on and off all the way through, and people watch this back as a recording. So welcome if you're on already. If you're not yet here and you're watching this back, welcome at a later stage nonetheless. And I'm excited today to be joined by three guests for our monthly live roundtable. And today we are focusing on the topic of alignment between sales and marketing. As always, we are going to be focused on how that feeds into things like our outbound channels, because that's why we live to exist here at Air. But I'm sure that we'll skirt around all of that topic on sales and marketing alignment, and how do we really get sales and marketing working hand in hand towards a common goal, and far more effectively and efficiently, as it does in most organizations. I'll run through our guest panel today. So today, I'm really pleased to be joined by our regular guest, Neil Clark. Neil's the commercial director here at Air Marketing, but also by our two guests today, Gareth Mapp. Gareth is the sales and marketing director at Software Solved. I'll let him tell you a little bit more about Software Solved in a moment. And also by Louis Fernandez, who returns to our event, previously a podcast guest on my podcast on Air. Talked about this exact subject and was so impressive, we invited him back. And Louis is newly in the role, reasonably new now, VP of Sales for EMEA at Uberall. Louis, I'll start with you if that's all right. If you could maybe just give us a quick 60 seconds. Who's Louis, who's Uberall, just so that our audience have got some background.
Thanks, Owen. Listen, delighted to be here. So thank you very much for having me again. So I've been in the sort of sales and marketing sphere now for the best part of nearly 30 years, which seems like a lot longer than it should do. But anyway, I started life off as a B2C marketer, moved into agency life, got bought by a tech company and ended up in sales. And here we now are. So I've done the whole gamut of sales and marketing, and now leading the whole sales effort across EMEA at Uberall. So who is Uberall? What Uberall does is we provide a software platform to enable brands to enable near me brand experiences for their consumers. What does that actually mean? Well, it actually means that we enable them to get found online, be chosen, and then ultimately drive loyalty. And we mean that in terms of driving footfall into physical stores. We mean that in terms of driving additional revenues and incremental revenues, and also engagement. So it's really that whole customer and consumer life cycle that we address. And it's about, making that online, offline journey for consumers absolutely seamless.
Fantastic. Brilliant stuff. Gareth, I'll bring you up for your spotlight 60 seconds as well, if you wouldn't mind giving a bit of background to the audience.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me, Owen, as well. It's a real honour and pleasure to have been invited. So I'm Gareth Mapp. I'm the Director of Sales and Marketing for a company called Software Solved. Basically, I started my career in sales for a global test inspection certification company, where I was commercial director for a number of years. Before then, moving into the manufacturing sector for a time, then on to recruitment. So I've tried quite a few industries, to be honest, before I ended up with my recent employer, Software Solved, where it's my first sort of lead sales and marketing position in the tech space. So who are Software Solved? So as a business, we basically specialize in custom software and data solutions. We're a Microsoft Gold partner. So we are heavily involved in the implementation and customization of Dynamics 365. We also offer a really robust data proposition that we've branded as Elevate, so helping companies to elevate their data, insights and knowledge, basically to help businesses grow, thrive and compete by unlocking and harnessing the power of their data to help make informed business decisions at pace.
Brilliant stuff. For a newbie in both of your roles, you are smooth as already. So nice to hear that you're starting with the solid foundations. I've just noticed Alex coming on. Alex, thanks for joining us, saying you can't hear us. I'm just getting sound check, but I'm hearing from other people they can hear us. So Alex, it might be potentially at your end. Just have a look. But thank you for the feedback. We'll keep looking into it. Guys that are watching this, you're welcome to comment. If you want to ask questions, put them in the comments. And I'll throw them at the panel through the conversation as and when I can and when it's appropriate. one of the bit of context I wanted to give in this conversation, one of the reasons we've invited both Louis and Gareth onto this, and I think we've got a really nice mix here, is that we've got Louis, who strategically has been talking about this for years and years. And I know that on our podcast, Louis, this is something that's not a new topic for you. You were talking about it way before it was cool. And we've got Gareth, who's in the mix now. So came in as a sales director, has recently sort of had to adopt marketing to some degree. So he's right in the mix of trying to make this work, sleeves rolled up, hands dirty, doing it. And I think those two perspectives will be really interesting. And then Neil, who is in a revenue lead role for Air, but comes from a marketing background as well, makes it a really interesting mix. So excited to discuss this topic with you all. Louis, I'm going to come to you first. You are, for me, like the mecca of this topic. Every time I talk to you about it, it makes sense. And I think it's a really hard thing to actually explain to people that maybe haven't studied it or looked at it or spent time talking about it internally. What is it? What is sales and marketing alignment? How do you describe it? And I guess, why is it important?
That's a great question. So I think the main thing about sales and marketing alignment, it's about understanding the other party's point of view and also what it is that they do and how they contribute to your success. I think oftentimes, and like I said, I've been doing this for quite a while, the challenge that I've seen is that sales don't speak marketing and marketing doesn't speak sales. And it actually ends up predominantly as a communication issue. So it's more about understanding where, like I say, the other party's coming from and walking a mile in their shoes almost, and being respectful of the jobs that they're doing, and actually understanding the value that each part of that value chain brings. You know, sales is not an easy job, but neither is marketing. And I think oftentimes in a B2B tech environment, particularly, there's maybe an underappreciation of quite how involved marketing can be, and it tends to be quite sales driven. And, you know, as you rightly say, I mean, I've spent at least the last decade, you know, trying to bring marketing and sales teams together, and that's what's driven a lot of the success that I've managed to get in the organizations that I've worked for, just by being able to do that. And like I say, I think that understanding, that willingness to work together, that congruence of goals, that's what I think is really important in that space. Oh, Owen, you're on my mute.
Thank you. There's a schoolboy error there. I haven't done that for a few months. Gareth, I'll come to you. Give me some anecdotal. Give us a sense of where, you know, what's ahead of you. So you've got your sales hat on. Now you've got to wear a marketing hat. What's ahead of you in the next 30, 60 days? What are the things that you're looking at to try and make sure that those work hand in hand?
That's a great question. I'm fortunate enough to have held sort of sales and marketing roles in the past, sort of at director level. And to be honest, I'm especially fortunate to have joined an organization that just get it. And it was evident to me, even from the off at my interview process with our managing director, Lindsay, who I know you know quite well, Owen. They really get it in terms of bringing our alignment piece together, sort of with a solid foundation based around getting the culture right. And they spend a hell of a lot of time really to working on those foundations and ensure that there's shared purpose, alignment between departments, etc. So for me, it's been a really easy transition so far. I appreciate the fact that I've got quite a journey ahead of me, honestly. But you know, in terms of the team that we have, we've got a fantastic MD that's really driving this forward alongside the rest of the leadership team. We've got an amazing head of marketing that unfortunately is departing shortly. So up to this point, things have been really well. There's shared purpose. We're in the process of just setting our strategy for next year and really ensuring that sort of goals and objectives are aligned, you know, based on the strategic objectives of the business and then cascaded down through. You know, communication lines flow freely. You know, we're making really best use of technology to ensure that even in today's environment, obviously with the sort of advent of remote working, we're utilizing, you know, Teams, channels within Teams, virtual meetings, etc., to ensure that we're all connected and collaborating effectively.
Good stuff. And Neil, I'll come to you for maybe some opening comments, because actually of all the topics that we've had over the last 6 months or so, this is probably the one that fits most with what you do on a day-to-day basis. Well, maybe give some idea on the journey you're on in owning revenue across air. There's a big marketing component that we've got marketing services. There's a big sales component to that. We've got sales services. And there must be some regular narrative that's coming up in your day-to-day that fits nicely into this topic.
Yes, I think it all feeds for me into the client experience, client journey, and actually embracing the differences. Where are there differences? And I think coming into both air, but also talking to a lot of clients, they have a different level of risk to marketing than they do sales. And there's a very different sort of language around sales and language around marketing services. I doubt there's many people that have come in and said we've got a major marketing issue, but I reckon there's a lot that said we've got a major sales issue. I doubt there's many that say marketing have smashed it this month, but I bet there's a lot that say sales have smashed it this month. And I think it's okay to recognize the differences, but I think the word alignment is best fits in that there needs to be, good marketing sells and good sales market, and that's the proximity of which they are aligned and their adjacency. I've written down a few notes, but I'd rather Gareth and
Don't you steal their thunder. Spot on. Do you know what? That's why I love having you on there, Neil, because every so often you come up with a little nugget there, and I think you've highlighted there. Marketing's boundaries of success and failure are a lot more narrow than sales. Variance, a degree of perception of performance, at least. And I think that's a really interesting point. Louis, I'll come back round to you. I want to ask a big question here, which is why. Why does it matter? We've already all said they have different characteristics, different behaviors. They are different departments in theory. Now, I know you argue that because you talk about your revenue. I think it's continuum is the word that you use.
That's right. That's the term I use, revenue continuum.
There you go. So I've remembered it well. I even wrote it down. And I think that we have to accept there are differences, as there are in any team. There's different parts of it. So why does it matter that they're aligned? What's wrong with them working in silos and going off and achieving their own individual goals and moving the business forward that way?
Okay, so the answer to this, I think, is pretty straightforward. One word, and I will elaborate on it: performance. It's really straightforward because if you have one person working on their own, they're generally not quite as successful as 1 + 1. Because oftentimes we use the old adage, don't we, that 1 + 1 = 3. So where we have alignment and we have, as I said, congruence of goals, and that's a big thing. That's a big ticket item, and not to be underestimated, because this also talks about alignment of metrics. So going back to the point you were making about, or other Neil was making around, you don't hear the term, this month marketing smashed it. The reason oftentimes is because the metrics are completely different. If you're measuring, and I'll just give a couple of examples. If you're measuring a volume of leads, that's not as exciting as measuring revenue, because that's what actually impacts share price. So the closer you get to impacting metrics that actually directly align to things like share price, is a good example, or valuation, whatever the key metrics are in your business, the more likely it is to be exciting. And if you can align them within the team and along that revenue continuum so that everybody's working to the same outcome, then you can share in that success all the way across. And I find that that's always generally the biggest barrier, is the fact that we're not working to the same metrics oftentimes. And again, to be successful, the most useful thing I think I've been able to do in all the instances where I've done it is just get that alignment of metrics and goals.
Do you know what? I'm going to give Alex Shrimpton, who is a regular attendee of these roundtables and has already posted 3 or 4 comments. Thank you, Alex, for joining us once again. Has made that point. He said also, I'll put it up on the screen here. Also, I'd say that there's usually a misalignment in the KPIs in which both teams work. And then if you have more aligned KPIs, which spoke to both departments, there'd be a bigger engagement and collaboration between both sides. And I think Alex, fantastic points along the same narrative. So what we're saying is that by having a shared goal, we get people pulling in the same direction versus effectively, I've got a goal over here, and occasionally those bang heads or they don't work together. if we look at the I've just seen LinkedIn user, I've no idea who you are, so by all means put another comment so we can give you a shout out by name. But shout out to Neil, brilliantly insightful. Neil, I hadn't thought about the way that we articulate our views on sales versus marketing success and failure. So a fantastic comment there as well. If we look at that KPI piece, so how do we set those? Because it's really easy to say, here's a KPI, off you go, everyone needs to buy in this. And on the one hand, you've got a junior SDR who makes part of the, potentially sales or marketing team, depending on where they sit. You've got a sales director over here, you've got maybe a CMO, you've got a marketing exec. Very different personalities, very different measurements of success as we've established. Gareth, I'll come to you. What are some of the things in your head around those KPIs? How we go about setting them? Who's involved in that discussion?
I think all of the key stakeholders have to be involved in that discussion. I think it's definitely a top-down approach that's going to be sort of fed from the strategic goals of the business, that's aligned to culture, values, etc. And just thinking about sort of some of the traditional metrics like ARR, conversion rate, conversion between stages, etc., that we tend to dwell on quite a lot. For me, and as a business, I think it should be much more aligned to being more customer-centric. So a big shift of ours and a big focus of ours going forward in implementing the key account management strategy for etc. is looking at more metrics such as lifetime value, account penetration in particular, and net promoter score, which is a massive one for us and closely aligns the sort of sales and marketing effort. So I think, I would come back to it and say that for me, it's all about sort of understanding what's important to the client and ensuring that the goals are created around that sort of customer-centric view.
Thank you. Brilliant. Louis, I'll come back to you on this because obviously we touched on KPIs going into this with your comment. What about what you're doing? Because you've joined a new organization. There's, I'm guessing, a period of time where you have to review all the numbers that people look at and consider in their day-to-day and what they mean and how effective are they for driving performance. Any comments on that KPI piece in terms of how you're going about that or about to or have gone about it?
Yeah, so again, some of the things that Gareth was just talking about. I mean, we absolutely track ARR. We absolutely track CAC to LTV. We absolutely track NPS. I mean, these are core metrics, right? And they determine business success. But I wanted to pick up on something else that Gareth was talking about. I know you and I have spoken about it before, Owen, and that was customer centricity. And, a lot of organizations that we all kind of work for, and it's especially prevalent in the tech space, right? We all have CROs, chief revenue officers. Yeah. Not a very customer-centric term. And I'm fortunate enough to have joined Uberall where we don't have a CRO. We have a chief customer officer who I report into. And, the whole point is going back to this revenue continuum, think of it almost as a customer continuum as well. Everything we do is to benefit the outcome that we're driving for our customer. And if that is our purpose, that is our raison d'être, then obviously, if we've got that outcome as the North Star that we're working towards, the revenues follow, because it's what we're trying to achieve on behalf of our customers that becomes absolutely front and center to how our success works. Successful customers, successful us. It's a symbiotic relationship.
So therefore, that KPI or those KPIs that you use to measure customer satisfaction, but the business benefits that they get out of working with you becomes the central focal point for all departments, not just sales and marketing.
Completely. And I think even more than that, the most satisfaction, and I think anybody gets, it's when we have a client that we've A, sold, B, onboarded, and C, we then see them being completely successful with the technology that they've used from us that help them drive, engagement, help them drive footfall, help them drive revenues, help them drive, the whole top line of their business. And that's what we see. So that's success for us.
I'm going to just throw a challenge in there, because if you don't know me, I know I like to do that every so often. So this kind of ties into a point that Alex has made, and I'll bring it up on the screen here because I think it summarized it well. He said, I think that also the attribution on what work marketing does is vague as well. When you talk about PR, brand marketing, these are at times unquantifiable metrics that play a role overall in the understanding of a company to prospects. And I think he makes a really good point here, because if we go out and set, and I'm not suggesting this is what you guys are saying we should do, but we simply say, here's some metrics that are measured around customer satisfaction. Don't worry about the stuff underneath it. That's what we're aiming for. Like you say, your North Star. My experience is most people, our senior leadership team might get that, and that might be what they move towards, and they're able to interpret. At a mid-level, junior level, that interpretation needs to be done for people a little bit more sometimes. And I think sometimes we can get ourselves in a position where we're giving people something that's so big and so vague, they just don't know how to get there. They don't know what they need to do to affect that. So Neil, maybe I'll come to you on this. What are some of the things that you look at underneath that? Because whilst I agree with you, having that kind of direction of travel, that big number, those measurements make sense. There needs to be a journey that gets you up to that figure, and things that affect that you can do on a day-to-day or week-to-week, rather than maybe a quarter-to-quarter.
Yeah, I was going to probably throw a bit of a spanner in the works on that, and say that global KPIs, absolutely, but subset KPIs are really important to keep everybody sort of moving in the right direction. Included, sales and marketing work on a different time frame, and we talk a lot about investment in marketing, and we talk a lot about the now of sales. And I think to particularly, I think the only key thing I was going to say is that there should be an equal seat at the table. So typically when we look at CROs, or revenue is going to win, because it's one of the three words in the job title. And I think that kind of the chase of revenue, the way that the bonuses and KPIs are set are very much turnover led. I think subset KPIs really to support the marketing effort, are whether that is, and I really like that cost of acquisition versus lifetime value. I think that's a really, really useful way. And then to be able to tell the story to the team about what that means and what part they play in that as a journey. So each stage that we look at, we will chunk that up into the customer journey, including post onboarding, how we market to them, how our finance, account, credit control, how people talk to them, are all customer touch points, are all experience points. So yeah, that's the only thing I was going to throw. Not really answering your question in subsets.
Oh, don't worry, I'm used to that now.
But
absolutely fine. Louis, go on. I know you want to add something.
Yeah, I was just going to say though, what is stopping any organization putting the same top line metrics in for their sales leadership and their marketing leadership? That's a choice thing, and the whole point is if you're measuring on the same metrics, which goes back to what I said right at the beginning of this, then there should be alignment. And why not everybody sharing the same success? Because at the end of the day, the way that we grow organizations, particularly in the tech space, is through the top line revenues.
Yeah.
And the top line revenues, you only get top line revenues coming in when you are successful with existing customers. Because if I'm trying to sell to somebody and they say, well, who else are you working with? We want to speak to a reference. Well, if you've not got happy customers, that doesn't exist. So you're less likely to sell and less likely to accelerate those top line numbers. So actually every part, this goes back to, again, my theory of the revenue continuum, every part from marketing to sale, or demand generation to sales, to implementation, to customer success, that they're all, if they're all measured in the same way, then surely we're all moving the customer experience in the right direction and getting great outcomes for those organizations that we work with. That to me just seems logical.
Yeah, I think it's a really valid point. And I think I think that what's interesting is that it's the direction of travel and the end outcome that we're walking towards together. We might take slightly different routes to that because you've got to execute on a marketing strategy, you've got to execute on a sales strategy, and we may not take the same path. And I think it's about, for me, it's about making sure that you give people the directions that get you there in different ways, as well as the end goal. And I think when you only give the end goal, that's when you tend to get sheep. You get people that will just follow and end up going in the wrong direction. And then you've got a fairly one-dimensional journey that's not harnessing every opportunity. And look, probably the worst analogy in the world. I made it up as I went along, I'm sure you could tell. But I think you get the idea there that yes, have those end goals, but you've got to have the process to help people to comprehend that. And then moving us on to our next point, you've got to drive the culture that encourages and embraces that. And I know that we've talked about that before, Louis. I'm just going to bring something up the screen. I feel like we've got a really intelligent, experienced audience today. Alex Henshaw has shared something. She says, shared KPIs are great. I think it's relatively easy to get that alignment if that process is handled well by leadership. Where Alex has seen challenges is around commissions, with salespeople being less into things like shared goals and more into hitting their personal targets. Have you any experience in handling that dynamic between sales and marketing? So, Gareth, I'll come to you first. We'll let you go first on this one. Feel free if you haven't had those challenges, if you've not got any thoughts around it, but please, if you've got some thoughts, share them.
Yeah, I mean, it's always going to be a contentious issue as well, isn't it? And ultimately, that is what sales professionals are ultimately driven by and measured on. And I know it can be a little bit of a pain point, particularly for sort of marketing execs and colleagues of theirs. Fortunately for me, I haven't come across any of those challenges up to this point. I think I've been fortunate enough to work in organizations where those sort of clear boundaries are well defined in terms of the contracts, etc., and people understanding of the goals and the requirements of their job roles. So obviously I'm still on that journey, and I'm sure that I'll come across this kind of thing, but up to this point, fortunately for me, I haven't had to encounter this.
Gareth, you're the luckiest sales leader I've ever met. Louis, love it, Gareth, brilliant. It must be something you're doing right as well to get people thinking that way. Louis,
I can't take credit for it, but I will, Owen.
Fair enough, I'll take it back. Louis, I'll come back to you. I'll pop it back up on the screen. So have you any experience in handling that dynamic between sales and marketing, and what advice would you give, particularly when it comes to remuneration, commission, that sort of stuff?
So first thing is, it's hard. And I think, yeah, absolutely, there are always going to be those kind of dynamics. I mean, what was it? If you've ever read The Challenger Sale by CEB originally, they talk about the 4 different characteristics of the kind of salespeople that you have, and talk about not just the challenger, but the other sort of characteristics like the lone wolf, the relationship person, the hard worker, those kind of things. At the end of the day, it's the data that drive us towards where you're going to be successful, right? And the data demonstrate that the challenger, who is collegiate and collaborative, but not just internally, but also with their customer, they're the ones that are more successful. And that's not my opinion. That's data.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, if you use that as a starting point, you say, well, okay, we can identify those people that do want to go it alone, but actually the reality is sales is a team sport. And as you get into larger deals, nobody closes a deal on their own. It just doesn't happen, right? You think about it, you might be the salesperson on the deal, but you've got solutions engineers, you've got pre-sales consultants, you've got business analysts. In some of the really large deals, you might even have a CFO working on it alongside you to do financial structuring of these things. You might have a CTO, to talk about how, it's going to integrate with other infrastructure. You're going to have people that are doing, work with other people in the business that you may not even be aligned to. And again, this goes back to how many people are involved in the decision making. So, and that extends beyond that, even to your marketing team, right? Because they're still engaging and helping to engage with other, actors in your deal that you never see, by feeding them content, by making sure they've got, access to the right information at the right time through the deal cycle, by helping with presentations and so on and so forth. There's so many myriad things that are involved. And, you know, to the point that was made, it's not just sales and marketing, but it's all the way across the whole dynamic. You may have, you know, people from the entire product team getting involved, where you've got things that are completely complex. And this is where I think you can then start absolutely aligning those KPIs and those metrics, because it's still based around the customer outcome. And the easiest way of measuring a customer outcome, a successful customer outcome, is based on the revenue that they generate. Because if you're not successful for them, they ain't going to pay you.
Yeah. Really, really great point. Thank you, Louis. Neil, let me come to you. So you said something earlier, which I didn't pick up on at the time, but it's kind of sat with me for a minute, which is around timeframes. And I think what you were saying is something along the lines of, you know, sales are celebrated for what they do today. Marketing contributed to that a month ago, a lot of the time, or 3 months ago, or 6 months ago. Maybe you can add a bit of narrative to that, because I think that's a really interesting point when it comes to understanding how we measure success of those departments in isolation and ultimately together on the end objective. Because we'll celebrate a sales rep getting a contract signed today, but we won't acknowledge the fact that marketing, like you said, designed the proposal, got the case studies, put the presentations, whatever it was, all the way through that journey. Why is it so different? Why are we not able to tie that together so well?
I think the proliferation of CRMs like HubSpot, Salesforce, and that adoption is going to make it a lot more easy to attribute the touch points, attribute the case studies, which you can directly point to a deal or a sale. I think that's the beauty of marketing, is they're working on the next year's plan. They're blocking out stuff, so there's a consistency and a blend and a trying to work looking forward and forward facing. Sales are doing that too in their planning, but I think one of my notes that I wrote down is you know, around that part of that buying cycle or going through into sale is, and I've got to give Christian Brock, who we check in each other fairly regularly, it gives me pretty much my best stuff at the moment, is the know, like, trust funnel. You know, and marketing sit in the top of that, and the sales sit in the bottom, the real pointy end of the sale, because they're very attributed. But I think the more that we have Salesforce, HubSpot, being able to see all of the emails, all of the times they've looked at the proposal and how many times, we'll be able to better attribute the weighting of how marketing have assisted sales in that point. And you know, it's just getting more and more. 10 years ago, you'd never know if someone had looked at your proposal or opened your email or clicked through. Now we've just got so much data and insight. We've got a really good view of the value of marketing and the value of good content, and you can A/B test it. You can do all you want to do around that, so that you can bring that in. Now we've got salespeople who are setting up sequences and you know, in SDR roles, who are coming back and saying, we need a fintech case study. Why? Oh, because we're going out to this particular market and we haven't got a design. I think it's there, and we're just getting round to getting our heads and getting into which part marketing plays over and above just a sales playbook.
And I think this just really interesting point. I think this feeds into, and Gareth, I'll come to you on this. Feeds into, I think we're asking salespeople to be more marketeers, and we're asking marketing people to be more sales, or have more of a sales understanding and mindset. And we're kind of centralizing everything, which comes up with your typically known as revenue team. Louis, an interesting concept around customer focused team. I really like that as well. So we're talking about education all of a sudden, aren't we? We're talking about people's personal development journeys, and not just being in a straight line, but also a bit sideways and diagonal, and giving them the variety and breadth of experience. Gareth, you've got salespeople in your business, you've got marketing people. What do you do to try and educate them around what happens on the other side of the fence?
It's a great question. For me, like, one of the things that really jumps out is this notion of demystifying the sales process, which you hear quite a lot, to be honest. I mean, ultimately, sales isn't a black art. It's, you know, for me, stick to the basics, do them well, be data driven, backed up by really good marketing insights. I think that's really important. Ultimately, sales and marketing, in essence, is a numbers game. Right? That's where it comes down to. Good data will drive good sales and marketing performance. And I'd be very wary of those sales professionals that sort of hide behind the data and can't articulate it really well. For me, sales isn't just about hunting, farming, cross-selling, etc. It crosses over quite nicely into the marketing aspect in terms of the top of funnel, raising awareness, and the education piece as well, which you quite rightly drawn out, which is for me acting almost like an advocate on behalf of the client or the prospect. So to bring back that knowledge and create that feedback loop, so we can upskill and educate colleagues right the way throughout the business in terms of commercial pressures that exist at client organizations, to ensure that they understand the role that they play and give them a real sense of purpose. Like for us, we have remote developers that work all over the country. It's quite easy for them to be quite isolated. They're working away on elements of code, etc. for quite large and prestigious clients of ours, not really understanding the very important role that they play. I think for sales and marketing professionals, there is that overlap in terms of gathering that correct information, the commercial awareness, and feeding that back into the organization to ensure that we're driving things forward, we're leading to further retention and growth of our existing client base, and ultimately create an environment where our clients are really happy and want to continue doing business with us.
Nice, love that. And it's interesting, you've wrapped it into other departments as well. And I think, back to Louis' point on customer centricity here and being focused on, it's not just about being in your lane anymore, is it? It's about understanding what everybody is doing around you and how you impact and affect. And surely as an employee or a member of a team, that makes you feel more empowered and that you're having a bigger difference because you can tie it all together in your mind. So really good point there. Sorry if I get this name wrong. Nazad Chagan, I hope I got that right. Thank you for your comments. I could not agree more about the data point, both qualitatively and quantitatively. Thank you very much for that comment, Gareth. What really good point there. Louis, kind of sticking on the same topic, you've obviously been through this journey a few times. Education must have played a key role in either the success or failure of some of those rollouts. Tell us a little bit more about what you've done or what you're doing to try and help salespeople value and understand marketing, and marketeers get what's happening in the sales department.
It's a great question. And actually, I want to pick up on a word that Gareth used a second ago, because there's one commonality, I think, between sales and marketing. And Gareth talked about commercial awareness. And I just like to think of it as commercial acumen, because at the end of the day, if you can start thinking about it in business terms, not in sales or marketing terms, it is just about how you conduct business. What are the drivers behind it? And how do we teach and educate and coach and develop and mentor our teams to have that commercial acumen so they can appreciate what's going on the other side of the fence? That's to me is key. And then at least you've got a common language. And it goes back to what I said right at the beginning. It's sales doesn't speak marketing, marketing doesn't speak sales. Actually, if you think about the Esperanto between them, it is commercial language. And I think that is the key to a lot of this. It really is.
Love it. We've had raison d'être, we've had Esperanto. We are turning continental in this session. Absolutely love it. Thank you. I absolutely love that. And I think, what the three of you are doing really nicely is simplifying this, because I think this is one of those topics that gets caught in, corporate language, sales and marketing alignment, but we're just stripping it down to the layers, which is actually, what's the intent that we give to people? What's the brief that we give to people internally? And how do we set that culture? Neil, I come to you because you've got a sizable sales team, a sizable marketing. You've also got the services going out there to be across, which is really interesting. You've got a much bigger sales team than marketing, though, and it would be very easy to just pull things into the sales narrative being the noisy one and the marketing getting absorbed in amongst it. How do you affect that? How do you make sure that I think you said earlier, equal voice at the table or equal weighting at the table? How do you make sure that you achieve that?
Yeah, I don't think it's about size of team. I think it's just about how much airtime, and it's just respecting each element of that. I think sort of knowing the impact and effect, and marketing done well looks easy, and sales done well looks easy. So both look over to the other side and saying, well, we're doing it really well, so they're the ones wrecking it. And it's always, it's about splitting that out and driving that alignment. I genuinely don't think it matters if you've got an unbalanced team, because you can run some incredibly good well-resourced campaigns and well-resourced things just with a good team. I think it's on the board. I think it's about having a weighting of acknowledgement of value, of trusting judgment. And I think where sometimes sales gets more airtime is that I think businesses will take more of a risk on sales, particularly salespeople, and they'll bring someone in and they'll say, oh, let's see how it goes. Whereas what they wouldn't do is take a risk on marketing or in a marketing person and go down. They're far more risk averse. So it's just about making sure. Now, that can work well when there's one person. It can also work really well when you've got two people, a sales director, a marketing director. I'm keen on kind of, I guess, Louis and Gareth's view on that. It's nice to get people together and to understand what are the issues involved, as well as what are the positives.
And that kind of gets us into the how. Just to take a step back for a second, I've just learned that the name I attempted very poorly was fine as Nuz. So that's made life a lot easier going forward. So more comments from you, Nuz, would be more than welcome. And thank you for helping me with that. And I've also noticed our friend Jerry Hill joining, and on the continental topic, talking about Hotel du Vin is his favourite place to stay in Exeter. So we are definitely moving into the continent for our next events, I think, by the sounds of things. But appreciate your comments, everybody. I just want to move backwards into something that Alex brought up on the comments a little while ago about Louis' point on shared metrics. There needs to be some give and take, because there's only a certain amount that sales control. And likewise with marketing, I'll bring the comment up there. Alex, thanks for another insightful and thought-provoking comment. I think it's a really good point when it comes to remuneration, because if we remunerate people and celebrate success globally, there is a level of impact outside of your control. Now, you might be able to influence that. I'd like to think you're a part of that discussion in most organizations that do things well, but only to a degree. The leadership are the ones that have that big influence across all functions. And I guess, how do you keep people motivated when their remuneration, the things that are really, particularly in sales, are really important to them? Maybe it's their priority. Maybe they're saving towards their first house, whatever. It's really important to me, and it's being heavily influenced by these people over here who I didn't hire, who I'm now relying on them to deliver, and vice versa the other way around as well. That must be it is a difficult challenge. Louis, I'll come to you, because that must be a discussion you've had with people in the past. How would you handle that objection or that commentary internally?
Again, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's not uncommon, but again, I think it's one of these things that we talk about being collegiate, we talk about being collaborative, and I think at the end of the day, when you suddenly realise that your outcomes are based on how your ability to relate to and work with colleagues is the central theme there. You've just got to get on the bus, and I think it's quite straightforward. If you think, let give you an analogy of a football team, right? You have a striker who maybe scores a goal, or Gary Lineker was a great example, always in the 6-yard box, right, and always scoring from in there. Somebody put the ball there for him, and there were a lot of passes beforehand to get there. And, not everybody's maybe got the same skill level as the person that does X or Y or Z, but they're part of the team.
Yeah.
And this is why I say sales is not a solo sport, it's a team sport. So, part of the job that I think we as leaders have is to show our teams how that collaboration works. So, I mean, I am standing shoulder to shoulder with my CMO, absolutely. Why wouldn't I? Our fates are intrinsically tied. So if I can sort of have that kind of relationship with that person, surely that permeates the entire organization. They think, well, actually, there's a good reason why Louis can be bothered to have that kind of relationship. It's not there, but it's also, if I look at my colleagues in go-to-market ops, or I look at my colleagues in customer success or customer operations, or any of these other departments, why on earth wouldn't I have a great relationship with them? Because it makes my life easier.
I
can't do it all on my own.
But,
So I have to co-opt other people, and this is I think part of, and likewise, they can't do everything that they need to achieve on their own, so they need to co-opt me. And that, to me, that's just what teaming is about, isn't it?
I think you're absolutely right. And what's interesting is how that dilutes as you get further down from board level or whatever it might be. And actually, I think we have to work harder to tie it together. So a business success you can't stand there at the end of a quarter or an annual shareholders meeting and go, we had a really good sales year, but a terrible marketing year. That doesn't happen. It's impossible. And equally, you can't have a great marketing year and a terrible sales year. These things work hand in hand, and they might be in slightly different timeframes, but generally speaking, they're going in the same direction together. What's interesting is at board level, those are tied together, as you rightly say, intrinsically. And it's almost as if the further down in the business we go, the more apart we allow them to be. And the narrative in the business is almost allowed to be more siloed and separated. And we as a leadership team, or as a strategic team pulling the company strategy together, have to realize that we have to work harder at a junior level for them to realize that success doesn't come from a department. It doesn't come from an individual. And I think back to your team sport analogy, Louis, I think it's a really good way of communicating it.
But it's also about encouraging that behavior. And I think, this goes back to another topic that's dear to my heart, in terms of, what is our job? What is our collective job as leaders? It is about creating new leaders and the next generation of leaders. So it's only by setting the example in the first place that we're going to get to where we want, right? And it's incumbent on us, and we have the responsibility to create that culture, to create that environment, to create those ways of working that encourage exactly that kind of behavior, because that's what we're really talking about.
Gareth, for you, we've used the word culture a lot, but we haven't really dug into how do you do that. Well, maybe give us some thoughts around some of the conscious decisions that you make, some of the things that you do to try and build a culture, create a culture where people are thinking this way about shared success.
It's a tough question, especially when it comes to changing a culture. I think one of my former colleagues used the analogy of like turning an oil tanker or something like this. I mean, it's a gradual process that takes a very long time. Ultimately, it's got to be top down. It's got to be complete buy-in in terms of the direction, creating the right environment, etc. It's got to be based around solid, open, honest communication, clarity around those shared objectives. Authenticity as well, I think, is really important particularly when it comes to leadership, because I think how you show up as a leader day to day influences the behaviors of the organization as well. About transparency, so I think you have to have that transparency to allow it to permeate through the organization if you're really going to embed a solid culture to allow you to achieve the performance that you'd like to achieve. Shared purpose as well. Again, I mentioned it a couple of times. I think having that shared purpose across the team is vitally important. And the last point, particularly when it comes to leadership, I think it's that human element. So again, being authentic, but ultimately understanding that we're all people, and everyone has got a job to do, but also a life to live. And ultimately, the way that we treat, we nurture, we coach, mentor, people at the organization, ultimately has a massive impact both on them personally and the way that they perform in their jobs.
Neil, do you want to add anything on that?
The only thing I want to add on that is just saying that sometimes for me, I'm going to take it so that we're not all agreeing. I'm going to take the approach that sometimes you need to keep functional, laser focused, and not be too sympathetic or concerned or worry about the other functions or departments in the business, not just sales and marketing, but also in delivery and operations and things like that. And the amount of times you can hear, oh, there's no point doing that because or oh, well, the problem's here. And I think it is sometimes that there's a relativity and certainly subsets within that you kind of go, no, we will assume that everything else in the business is working perfectly.
Yeah.
So we've got to be super clear that this is not about talking out of doing things because we are being oversympathetic to the other function or other functional parts of the business. We still adopt as high a quality bar and as good an approach as we can in each of our different functions, and it's down to managers, those functions to creep up, get better, because sometimes marketing will be working on something that sales don't really want to do. So to be too collaborative across that's a leadership problem, that's a leadership issue, and I just want to offer that as a slight alternative to say that's healthy, but not to be in each other's pockets too much.
I think it's a fantastic point, because we can sell the romantic nature of a perfectly harmonious working culture that's with everyone aligned. Louis' very first point in this discussion really early on was, it's hard, right? This is not easy. And that isn't what it looks like in any organization. There are always people who don't buy into it. There are always people who don't get it. There's always things that disrupt the momentum that you've got. And to your point, Neil, and I'll come back to Louis' analogy, sporting analogy. If you're on the training pitch for a football team, the strikers aren't watching the defenders training and telling them what to do. They're busy going and practicing their part of the game, which is finishing, scoring goals, shooting. And you have to trust people in the team to do either the best job that they can on that day, or to be understanding that they're learning from their mistakes and moving forwards. Louis, go. You want to say something?
And I completely agree with what Neil said. You've got to swim in your lane, right? That's important. And there's no reason why the focus that each individual has shouldn't remain exactly where it needs to remain in order to be successful overall. And again, going back to the idea of the revenue continuum, part of it is to understand where those handoffs are, what your roles and responsibilities are within that continuum, and when you pass them on. Now, going back to the football analogy, as you were just saying, I mean, you've got the strikers practicing one thing, goalkeepers practicing something else, defenders practicing something else. The measure's still the same thing, though. It's goals scored.
Yeah.
Don't kid yourself as anything else. So this is why I say, from an alignment point of view, it's still about measuring the same outcome.
Yeah, very good point. Ultimately, go on, Gareth.
Just to continue on that analogy as well. Yeah. Let's not forget that there's a manager behind the scenes that's pulling all this together. So ultimately, there will be people that are responsible for each of their individual tasks, staying in their lane, etc. But there is a team of professionals, a manager, coaches, staff, etc., that are responsible for bringing all of this together and ensuring that they're aligned to get the best performance out of the team, score the most goals, win the game.
And I think let's carry on with the analogy. What I love about this, because it's easy to visualize, isn't it, that they will spend a certain amount of their time doing their thing, practicing their skill, but then they'll also spend a certain amount of time together. And I think that really nicely rounds into our point earlier around culture and this crossover and education piece. If you never expose your salespeople, particularly your junior salespeople who are coming up and who are the next leaders, to what marketing does, they will never understand it and therefore never appreciate it. Equally, if your marketeers never get to sit in sales conversations and sales meetings and understand that feeling and understand what that experience is like, they'll never fully comprehend and appreciate that. And the word appreciation, I think, plays a huge part. If I appreciate what my colleague does, I'm far less likely to be critical of it. And appreciation comes from understanding. It comes from knowing what it looks like. And I look at it and go, geez, I couldn't do that as well. Great. I'm now appreciating it rather than criticizing it or wondering if it can be done better. And I think, hey, this football analogy has done us a favour. I was half expecting Gareth the Welshman to take us off the rugby for a minute there. But I think the important thing is there actually is a nice way of looking at it, that we do what we do most of the time, but we need that crossover into other departments. And if it isn't there, we get segmentation, we get silos, but you can't be all in playing the same role. You've got to do different things and own that. And Neil, back to your point, we have to trust people to do that piece. So I think we really nicely touched on that cultural piece, the way that we expose, we get people in meetings. And Louis, I'm going to come back to our discussion a couple of months ago on the podcast. You actually talked about getting marketing people into sales meetings, didn't you?
Absolutely. I think it's completely critical, because I think it's one of these things that, as we have those meetings, the whole point of customer centricity is so that everybody understands what is going on with the customer. You can't do marketing if you've never had any exposure to a customer. It doesn't work. So, you know, it's one of these things that this is why I think it's absolutely vital that everybody who's involved with that revenue continuum does have some sort of exposure to the customer at some sort of point and understands the challenges that they're trying to, you know, resolve in their organizations, because it just makes you better at doing what you need to do to interact with that.
Yeah, absolutely amazing. Love that. That's a really good point. We'd do it the other way. Go on, Gareth.
And yeah, just to take that one step further into what Louisa, I completely agree. And something that we're doing as a business at the minute, because obviously with the restrictions that are still sort of looming in place from COVID, etc., what we're doing at Software Solve is actually recording a lot of our client interactions, whether discovery calls, demos, etc. We post these in Teams channels so that not just our colleagues in marketing, but also some of our more technical colleagues, developers, etc., they can all review these demos and client interactions and get a better understanding of how we deliver key messaging, how we pitch in, etc., and get feedback from them in terms of how we can further refine things going forward.
Yeah, very nice. Now, I want to kind of wrap us up on one topic, because I think we've covered a lot of ground today. And one of the things I wrote down about halfway through this conversation was, aren't you lucky if you get a sales leader who understands marketing, or a marketing leader who understands sales? And the fact that we've moved in the last kind of 5 years or so towards CROs versus heads of sales and heads of marketing, people who own revenue. And I acknowledge your point, Louis, around whether revenue is the right word or not, but that is where we are at the moment, generally speaking. Now, in Neil, we got lucky. We found somebody as a sales lead originally who had a marketing background. So, you know, that was fortunate and a really nice place to land. But it's rare that you get people who really get most. So I'm going to ask you a question that I'd be really interested in your opinion. Gareth, I'll come to you first. If you could have one revenue leader, would you rather they came from a sales background or a marketing background?
Ooh, that's a contentious question.
Louis got time to think. Louis got time to think.
Yeah, I know. Thanks for dropping me in. You know, for me, I'm going to be diplomatic and I'll say someone with a commercial background, to be fair. Okay. So someone who has elements of both, ideally, someone who's got a really, really rich understanding or that commercial acumen that Louis referenced earlier.
So you skipped the question, Louis?
So in a somewhat self-serving answer, somebody who started in marketing and ended up in sales. There we go.
Nice. Jerry Hill, if you were on the panel, I'd be asking you why. Can you type me a... He said, neither. I want somebody who is a scientist. I love that. Classic Jerry. Very, very good. Neil, you can't beat that. So I'll throw you under the bus and you can go after Jerry Hill.
Yeah, no, I can't. And he's stolen my insight answer anyway. I'll say marketing. Set price, positioning, all of that. I think you can only... For me, and I'm happy that I can be proven otherwise, I think you can only go as fast as a business as your lowest status or your lowest performing kind of function as far as that goes. So, you know, we can outperform in sales, but if marketing is not aligned and up alongside it, I think we're kidding ourselves. And the same with marketing, you know, the best marketing and mediocre sales, you're only going to go as fast as your sales team, right?
Yeah. Yeah, you're only ever go as fast as your weakest thing. And I think back to Gareth's point earlier, it's data and insight and numbers that drive good decision making, not sales skills at a strategic level. So if you get average salespeople talking to more of the right people, they'll get more sales. Absolutely, you can train people to be better salespeople, but if they're still talking to the wrong people, you ain't going nowhere. It doesn't matter. And I think that data and insight piece plays a key role. So my opinion is exactly the same as yours, Louis. And if I had to pick, I think it's a marketing lead. Absolutely agree with your point, Gareth. And I think ultimately, you know, anybody at that level that's doing a good job will have exposure to both, been involved in both. But I would far rather, if they were traditionally trained in marketing over sales, I'd far rather that from a revenue lead perspective. And I think there's something about a level of empathy in marketing people that doesn't exist in sales people sometimes, that makes people great leaders that are focused on the wider picture. In my experience, sales leaders are all too often dragged into the weeds, into the sales, into the conversations with customers, and not as focused on the strategy sometimes. And that's something to watch. Our friend Nuz says nice, as that's where I started marketing to sales. So good to know we've just signed off on Nuz's career choices. Fantastic news. And Nuz actually commented earlier she's former marketing manager at IKEA as well. So a good background there, which is fantastic. Thanks for joining us today. Guys, we are pretty much coming to the end. We've explored a hell of a lot today. Really enjoyed the discussion, as I always do with the three of you. Louis, if people want to get in touch with you, talk to you, whether it's on this topic or just about Uberall or learn a bit more about what you guys do, what's the best way they can do that?
Easiest thing, just get in touch with me on LinkedIn.
Hanging out on LinkedIn.
Happy to take any questions.
Brilliant stuff. Gareth, how about you?
Likewise, LinkedIn.
LinkedIn's always best, isn't it? Good stuff. Well, look, Gareth Matt is the Sales and Marketing Director at Software Solved. Louis Fernandez, VP Mia, is that right?
That's right, VP Sales EMEA.
VP Sales EMEA, thank you. Missed out sales, not revenue. VP Sales EMEA for Uberall. Look them up on LinkedIn, get in touch. For now, gentlemen, thank you ever so much for your contribution on this discussion. Really enjoyed it. Have a good rest of your day. And guys, thank you in the audience for all of your comments and questions today. And bye-bye for now.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks everyone.
Bye-bye.
Pleasure. Bye-bye.